So Sidney Ortega advocated that violent video games are insignificant to youth violence. To support this, she stated that violent video games are irrelevant to violent crime and that video games can help improve the behavior and mood of youth, which decreases the chance of acting violently. However, claiming that violent video games are insignificant to youth violence is a generalization and ignores specific areas. To prove this to you, I will first talk about how youth violence, not all youth violence may be influenced by video games, but there are cases where aggression has been linked to video game play. And second, how different groups of children absorb and react to different ways depending on many factors. So first, we'll discuss how there have been cases where violence has been linked to video games. People who commit aggressive crimes have admitted to having been influenced by video games. For instance, a man in 2013 hijacked a truck that was running with a passenger in it and drove around recklessly in a parking lot, hitting 9 vehicles. CBS News reports that during questioning, the man allegedly told the officer he wanted to see what it was really like to play the video game of Grand Theft Auto. This man literally wanted to feel what it was like to be in the game, so he reenacted it in real life. Also, there is no definite link between video games. The advocate claimed that video game sales have gone up and violent crime committed by youth has been dropping, but there is no definite link between the two. There could be many reasons to why crime has gone down at the same time that video games have gone up. For instance, it could be that the people are spending more time inside playing the video games than being outside committing crimes or being prone to crimes. Time magazine reports that the average U.S. gamer ages 13 or older spent 6.3 hours a week playing video games. So these 6.3 hours that are spent playing video games are 6.3 hours that are spent not committing crimes. So those two things could that could very well be a reason to why crime goes down. Secondly, the advocate claims that video games can help improve behavior and mood of youth, which decreases the chance of acting violently. However, different groups of children absorb and react different ways depending on many factors. Depending on age, aggression can be received and relieved in different ways and on different levels. In a study done by National Center for Biotechnology, they examined the associations among violent video game exposure, hostility, arguments with teachers, and school grades and physical fights. The study was done on 607 8th and 9th grade students. Adolescents who exposed themselves to greater amounts of video game violence were more hostile and reported getting themselves into greater amounts of reported getting into arguments with teachers more frequently, were more likely to be involved in physical fights, and performed more poorly in schools. These are just two grades that they were linked to being affected by violent video games. So different ages can be influenced in different ways. In addition, not all children were raised the same way. The advocate claimed that young people and gamers know the difference between virtual violence and real-world behavior. However, depending on the life experiences and culture that different children may have grown up in, they may take things differently. In the Encyclopedia of Children and Childhood History, in a section called Anger and Aggression, it is stated that anger is interpreted, managed, and regulated differently in different social contexts. Cultures vary in their attitude toward anger, norms regarding its expression, and beliefs about the extent and normalcy of anger in children, all of which contribute to child rearing patterns and children's experiences. So that means that depending on the way that the child grew up, they could be influenced differently by the video games and react differently towards them. Therefore, this is why I claim that claiming that video games are insignificant to youth violence is a generalization and ignores specific cases.
Right, you start off pretty effectively citing the advocate's claim and secondary claims. Then you present kind of your own structure. You've got two issues that you're going to be doing, and then in the context of the argument, it seems like you're trying. Where are you? It seems like you're trying to mix those two from time to time. So you're never only following the structure of the advocate. Sometimes you've got your own argument that you're making there, and then you plug in the advocate's or how the advocate's argument would apply to your argument, and then sometimes it's the advocate's argument, and you're explaining how your argument applies to it, and it's a little bit unclear. It's harder to follow than it should be. So I think you want to try and keep the structure, and then put your inferences into the responses that you're making as you make them, instead of previewing them at the beginning. I think that might be a little bit clearer. You could have a more general response at the beginning and explain that, but then just use those as you're going through the speech to respond to those particular points. I thought you had some good challenges on the evidence. I think the idea of coming up with counterexamples where there is a demonstrable relationship between video game violence and actual violence that was fine. You had the guy playing Grand Theft Auto with the car in the parking lot. I thought that was pretty effective in demonstrating that there is sometimes an effect. I thought your response to the conundrum about the video game violence getting more substantial and that violent crime going down, that's a dilemma that the advocate points out. You've got a couple of answers on this. I'm not exactly sure that they help you that much because if in fact that people have less time to commit the crimes because they're inside playing the games, that seems to support the advocate's position. If I was responding to this, I'd say, yep, good. Let them spend more time playing video games. In fact, if they doubled the amount of time playing video games, that would cut crime in half, which is the exact opposite of the position that you were kind of advancing in other places. That's, I think, an inconsistency that's problematic. I think you ought to make some hay out of the fact that you've got a broad study with a substantial number of people who participated in it, who all report increased hostility as a result of their experiences in playing these kinds of games, and say, look, we're back to the issue. Not everybody who plays these video games has these problems, but we know that some kids clearly do have these kinds of problems, so that doesn't mean that we should dismiss any relationship whatsoever. I think that that's an effective way of talking about that issue. I thought there was another interesting point that you had where you were talking about, depending upon the way the kids are raised, and you mentioned anger kinds of normative behavior in that argument. It seems to me like one of the things that you could argue is that these video games change what is a normative response, and that's the thing that is a little bit concerning to us. That we might see this as being an appropriate response because we get used to seeing it in the video games. And that might be a problem also. Even if it's not direct violence, it's tolerance of violence, and that is also problematic. So I think that there are some ways that it could be developed a little bit more. But I thought you found good arguments on those points. I think you need to attack the evidence that the advocate used a little bit more and challenge it. But your counterclaims, when they were clear, I thought they were good arguments. Sometimes I just didn't think they were as clear as they needed to be. All right. Thank you.